Well, welcome to the Janelle King Show. I am Janelle King, and this is Extra 106.3. And this is where we discuss kitchen table topics that are typically banned from family gatherings, but are absolutely necessary. And I'm going to say extremely necessary in order to have a strong republic. And before I get started with this show, I obviously prepared this show a little bit before the attacks that have taken place on American soil. And I'm saying it like that because that is what it is. We are being attacked on our land. And for those who don't remember 9/11, the emotions that are associated with that may not be there. But for those of us who absolutely remember 9/11, that same righteous indignation, that same anger and frustration that we felt back then, I feel it now on a greater scale as I've grown up a lot more. I was in high school at that time. I didn't fully understand it. Today, I understand what this means on a greater level. And while we're not going to talk about that per se, because I know there's so much still being developed, my heart and my prayers are absolutely going out to the victims of those who are impacted by these attacks. But it actually does tie in a little bit to what we're going to talk about, because today's kitchen table topic is populism. We're going to talk about populism, and I'm going to talk about it from several different ways. A little bit of history, and then I also want to show how there are so many positive things associated with populism that I believe people see and they look at it and they embrace it, but they don't do a complete, what I call 360 thought, where you just kind of look at it from every angle. And while doing that, you can absolutely see how in some cases these messaging and the whole populism space can be something that's really, really positive, but then can absolutely turn into something that is negative. And so we're going to dive into that. And then lastly, I'm going to talk about voter responsibility. Like, what do we do now that we're in this new era of populism where it's now the primary political strategy? So what does that mean for us as voters? So we're going to get into all of that in this show. Thank you for coming in, for tuning in. Please make sure you stay with us. You know, as we're entering 2025, we are fresh into this new year where there are a lot of local races that may be on the ballot. And then we have the 2026 midterms coming up as well. And just understanding that this new wave of politics that's coming into effect right now, it is imperative that we understand this new wave of politics, especially if we're going to accept populism as the primary campaign strategy that our candidates are using and are going to continue to use. We must, as voters, understand that there are pros and cons that come along with this. So this show is going to be dedicated to covering where we are today regarding populism, where it started and everything in between, and closing with my perspective on what we need to do as voters, as I said earlier, to ensure that we are not being led or manipulated when we're going through the candidate selection process. Populism, if for those of you who don't know what this is or have never heard the term, or you keep hearing the term and you don't have a full understanding of it, here's a short definition that can help you kind of keep it in mind. So populism in a nutshell is a political approach that seeks to represent the interests and voices of the everyday voter. Oftentimes this comes by pitting the voter against the elite or the establishment, the deep state, big government, etc. However you want to, whatever you want to call it, it's taking the voter and pitting the voter against them. So against that big entity or that big conglomerate. In execution, populism movements, candidates, and other leaders typically emphasize direct communication with the public or the voter, with proposed simple solutions to complex problems, often messaging in a way that can be understood to or by the basic third grader. So basically the messaging is very, very simple to digest and take in and receive. And they tend to champion the plight or the concerns of the common man or the common voter. Although in many of these cases, many of these people are far from living common lives, at least not today. They may have at some point in their lives, but they're certainly not living a common life at this present moment. So it's important to know that overall, populism is not about trying to well, I'll say this. I won't say it's not about trying to control people. That's where I was going to go. But there is an element of populism that is controlling, but it's more so about relatability. Populism overall is about relatability. It's about, kind of showing and standing with the people. But what are you standing against? That is always the question, because populism has to have something that they are angering you up against, or causing you to be upset about, or fight, or feel, frustrated. In order for populism to work, there has to be something that we are all kind of uniting around to fight against. So why are we talking about this, particularly right now? And it's because we just lived through a campaign season that was nothing but populism on display. Both Trump and Kamala ran very similar campaigns, but what made them different and ultimately decided the outcome of the election was how they attacked populism. Both of them attempted to be relatable. Relatability politics was like on display, which is populism. So Trump, he did it successfully. And Kamala, on the other hand, not so much. I believe that populism did not work for her, mainly because she tried to relate to people based on surface issues. She was connecting on race, gender, education, auxiliary and organization affiliations like the Divine Nine and the fraternities and sororities, which is the Divine Nine, or which are the Black fraternities and sororities. While Trump was being more relatable by trying to relate to people based on experiences. What was your experience at the grocery store? Your experience at that school board meeting, in the board meeting if you're a corporate person, etc. So he was connecting on experiences, while Kamala was connecting on surface issues and social issues. And the reason one worked and the other failed, I believe, was due to that slight difference. You see, surface issues, when underlining the main or the over issues, when the underlining issues are stabilized, surface issues matter. But on the reverse, when it's not, when people are struggling and the economy isn't strong and all this other stuff, it's not going to work. People tend to vote based on gender only when the economy is strong. When they feel like their basic needs, remember Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but when they feel like their basic needs are being met and are being secured, then we tend to see a trend where voters tend to start looking at other issues to vote for. And I call it the fat king, the fat king scenario. I always joke and say, America the fat king. And for those of you who have listened to previous shows, you may have heard me relate to this. And just the fat king just being simply that, just being the guy who was running everything, who lived great, who won all the wars, and he just sat and ate sugar and bonbons and got big and fat and, and got lazy. And so as of right now, it's like we're teetering on that, because we get to do a lot of things that other countries don't get to do, because we have levels of privilege and comfort here in America. But anyway, so as I stated, people tend to vote based on gender and social issues when the economy is strong, and they're not having to choose between feeding their family or buying gas in order to get to work. So when that becomes the problem, we're now in a huge, huge, huge issue. So if you want to know more about why I believe Trump won, you can definitely, get all that from the previous show that I did. So we're not going to go too deep into that. But today I want to focus on the strategy and not necessarily the person or the outcome, because there are many who believe in this approach, and several movements who have latched on or resurfaced as a result of this, such as MAGA, the Make America Great movement. And then we had the People's Party, howbeit was, their brand didn't necessarily start here. It's been around for a very, very long time, but we've certainly started seeing it resurface. And now we're seeing where Marianne Williamson is considering running for DNC chairwoman, as she was a member of the Green Party. So clearly it's a strategy that is attractive to most people, but that's also the thing that makes it most concerning. So why do I find it important for us to discuss populism? Because it's the first step before socialism. And if it doesn't mean And that doesn't mean that we are all now headed into socialism under the Trump administration because he's now going into the White House and he ran a populist campaign. That's not what I'm saying. There's some underbelly, some underlining things about populism that is very closely related to socialism. And that's what we're going to talk about. And so I don't want us to assume that because the party is working with this, that means that they're somehow, they are doing something wrong. That's not what I'm saying, because it's not about the person. It's the use of populism. It's about the motive. It's about the momentum at the time. A couple of people who really use populism to gain control. You have Hugo Chavez, you have Fidel Castro, Juan Perón, you have Benito Mussolini, you have Adolf Hitler, Vladimir Putin. All of these people that we've heard, some of you may have heard of, some of you haven't, but they rose to really cause a lot of havoc and are continuing in some cases, like Putin, to cause havoc by using populist tactics. These leaders use a lot of populist rhetoric and strategies to mobilize support and to consolidate their power. Oftentimes, this is happening while they're appealing directly to the masses while positioning themselves against what they would call the perceived elites. So we must keep in mind that all of these leaders, now that they're hated, they were once loved. There were people who supported them. There were Jewish people who were pushing out pamphlets in support of Hitler prior to him becoming the Hitler that we all know and hate today. And it made me think about this on a deeper perspective. And it's not that I'm anti-populism. I just believe that it should be a part of the process.
Hello, everyone. My name is Suzanne Guy, and this is the Church's Moment. There is an incredible opportunity to start a distinct pro-life ministry at your church. We started one at our church about 5 years ago, and the fruit has been tangibly beautiful. We do monthly meetings that educate and equip the body of believers on sanctity of human life issues from womb to tomb by bringing in and featuring different pro-life leaders from all over Georgia, as well as featuring different ministries like post-abortion healing ministries or foster care ministries. There are so many great community partners out there. And then the second part of this pro-life ministry is having a care team. This is an opportunity to show moms in crisis, moms in unplanned, unwanted, or crisis pregnancies, that the church is the place to run to, that the church is a safe haven and a place to go for tangible help, real hope, true compassion, friendship, and discipleship, and yes, an opportunity to share the gospel in both word and deed. Brothers and sisters in Christ, will you consider starting a distinct pro-life ministry at your church? It's so easy. Please contact me today to find out how simple this is. You can contact me at my email, proverbs31:8@att.net. This is the Church's Moment.
Thank you so much for joining the show. Please remember to like, share, comment, and subscribe. And don't forget to hit that notification bell so you'll be notified every time I upload new content. Now back to the discussion. Now that I've given you the overview of populism, let's discuss where it came from. Let's look at its origin. Let's kind of do a little bit of a historical deep dive so people can really understand what they're saying when you say that I believe in populism or I love populism or populist is great. Just make sure you know what you're talking about. So the Populist Party, also known as the People's Party, emerged in the late 1800s, and this party was formed in a response to the economic challenges that were being faced by farmers and workers at that time. Populist Party originated in the South and the Midwest. It arose from concerns over corporate control of the economy and practices in banking that were viewed as unfavorable to farmers and laborers. Key figures and key players that kind of helped build the populist movement include James B. Weaver, who was a leader as a presidential candidate in 1892, Tom Watson, who advocated for rural Americans, and then you have people like Mary Elizabeth Lease, who's also known for a lot of her speeches where she was encouraging farmers to pretty much take action regarding their conditions. So the Populist Party gained a lot of traction in the early 1890s by advocating for various reforms, including the regulation of railroads and the implementation of a graduated income tax. And so in the 1892 election, they secured several states and local offices. However, by the late 1890s, the party began to decline. And a lot of people say that it was because of internal divisions and the Democratic Party's adoption of some of the populist ideas versus, kind of pushing against it and holding to the same way they've been doing things. I guess they saw that, populism isn't a bad thing. It kind of does work. And so there's research that shows that there are people that from back then who believe that that's what contributed to the downturn. And so in 1896, there was an election that was particularly significant as it relates to this because a populist candidate, William Jennings Bryan, he aligned with the Democrat Party, which further diluted the identity of the Populist Party. So what started happening was the Democrat Party started saying, hey, I see some of this stuff. Let me take over some of these ideas and let me do some of this stuff. And because the Democrat Party is more well known, people started equating the populist strategy to the Democratic strategy. But it really was the Populist Party strategy. So many would say that the reason that the party faded away is often centered on the challenges around unity and its approach to several different issues. So let's go into the minutia of it a little bit. So their approach to racial issues was something that people say also contributed to some of these challenges. So while the party sought to unite various groups, it ultimately struggled to maintain this broad support, especially among Black farmers, which was affected long term and affected its long term objectives because the Black farmers was very much so necessary to be a part of this movement. Black farmers left the Populist Party primarily due to increasing racial tensions and the party's inability to maintain its commitment to racial unity. And it's very interesting to point that out because a lot of people always give the Republican Party a bad name, but the Republican Party, and I'm not talking about the conservative party of the 1800s, or the 1900s, I should say. Well, no, this was the 1800s, but it was more so the Republican Party. And so don't worry, I'm gonna talk about that in another show, but there is a split, guys. There is a difference between the conservatives and the Republicans. And so back then, especially during the Gilded Age and all of that, there was, the conservatives felt like, Black people should have certain rights. And then you have, or should just be freed with no rights. And then you have the Republicans who felt like Black people should be freed and they should have rights. So, we'll get into all of that. So this right here, what you were seeing is that the Populist Party, howbeit it was not a part of the Democrat Party, but it also encompassed a lot of people who felt like they were being pushed aside and not being heard as the country was developing and growing. And corporations were starting to rise up. So now you have the Democrat Party that's now morphed into the Populist Party, and they're bringing their values. And we all know the history of the Democrat Party, particularly when it comes to racial issues. They were completely anti-racial issues. So now we have Black farmers who are like, I think I'm going to pull out because there's been an increase of racial tensions, and the party's inability to just maintain its commitment to racial unity was an issue. So initially, the Populist Party aimed to unite poor white and Black farmers around a common economic interest. However, as the party faced pressure from Southern white Democrats, the broader social climate in the late 19th century, it began to compromise the inclusivity in order to attract white voters. It's great when we're trying to push a cause, but now we're trying to win elections. We got to start lumping people into these weird categories, and it just doesn't work having Black people and Black farmers and poor white farmers all in the same category. So that was a problem. So I want to explore, and we'll dig into that a little bit later on another show. But I want to now explore some of the pros and cons and how some of these pros can also become cons as we kind of push forward in understanding populism. Because populism, like all things, isn't perfect. But when you're having to make these major decisions, like who's going to run the country, particularly as a voter, you must be able to use what I stated earlier, that 360 thought process, allowing you to see how a good thing can sometimes become a bad thing later. And unfortunately, that tends to be the case. And it's very sad. It doesn't, I don't know, but it does happen, right? So I want to start by discussing the first pro that I kind of brought up a little bit, and that's relatability, because relatability is something that is the key. It's almost like the nucleus of populism. Populists are excellent at making you feel like they are one of you. Like, oh my God, a good populist will make you think, I go to bed thinking of you. I wake up thinking of you. Everything I do is for you. That's kind of the energy that populism puts forth. And like it's almost like they understand the situation as well as the emotional toll. So it's like, I get what you're going through. I get your I get your stressors, but not only do I get it, but I am going through it with you emotionally. That's also how they tend to do this. But relatability can have an adverse response as well. When being understood is the priority, relatability can make you feel like you are understood. But is it possible to truly understand everyone? Absolutely not. It's not possible. So you have to place us in these marginalized groups in order to empower us as a whole. So in other words, Janelle, you may be dealing with the grocery store issue, while this other person over here is dealing with, the high costs of housing. So both of us have a major issue. So instead of me having to pull myself in all these different directions, if I'm the populist candidate and try to like appeal to the housing, appeal to this, appeal to that, I'm going to lump you all into these categories. So now I'm going to create these marginalized groups, right? So now we got, the black people who are not able to buy groceries or afford housing. So that must mean that there's something happening to them as a group, and I'm going to stand for you. That's kind of how all of this kind of goes into effect. And so we have to be very, very careful about being marginalized into these groups in order to be empowered as a whole. And there are some that I believe that pretty much love being marginalized, such as those who believe that there should be a black agenda. Like, there are people who believe that we need to have a black agenda. I personally believe that we all share the same concerns. We just prioritize them differently. So if I had to come up with an agenda for different subgroups, it's not that I'm coming up with totally different plans and strategies and thought processes and all that. I think we just come up with, how do we prioritize these? Which needs do we need to address immediately in that community, while we may be addressing something else in another community, but they're all under the same umbrella of issues. That, to me, is how it should be done. But there are people who think there should be a black agenda, there should be an LGBTQ agenda, there should be a female agenda, there should be a male agenda, a young person agenda, and the list just can go on and on and on. But is this a positive? Separating us into groups based on superficial identification markers. Does this lead to more division, or does this help? I think it leads to more division. And what we've also seen is that it doesn't work. When the economy is failing, at that time, we are all the same. We are all Americans. And that is where we all can unite, particularly also around when the country is attacked. When the country is attacked, all these small fights that we're having at home, doesn't matter. We all got to come together, walk out that front door, and stand as a united front as Americans. So I believe that it's a positive to be able to speak to all of us and relate to many of us as a group, but not when we have to create subgroups. Another massive pro that can also be a con as it relates to populism is that populism leads to increased political engagement. Populism brings the grassroots of society to the forefront. Matter of fact, the grassroots drives populist campaigns, but that makes up the grassroots as a whole. I mean, it's really all of us. It's not just, grassroots that's associated with little small communities. It's all of us. On occasion, I find where the grassroots is referred to as the state party members, like the Georgia GOP we have here, or the Georgia Democratic Party. Oftentimes, that's where we tend to connect the grassroots to, right? Like, these are the people that are doing the political work. But in fact, the grassroots is really everybody, and they are a part of the grassroots. But we have to watch voter engagement rise as a result of populism, because the grassroots in and of itself, while it may have started out as being party people, now it's everybody. And you have populism to blame or populism to thank, depending on where you stand in that argument. As I do find that there is a correlation between populism and the rising of populism and the increase of voter engagement. For example, in approximately, let's look at 1992. In 1992, approximately 55.2% of eligible voters participated in the federal election. 55%. We skip all the way down to 2020, and approximately 66.8%. So we're talking about 55% compared to 67%. Okay, so 92, we only had about half of the country was participating in our elections. Now we're looking at almost 70%. That's major. And that is what populism does. Increased voter engagement is not a bad thing, but what are they engaging? And why are they engaging? That's what matters. If we're seeing an increase of engagement because we are all being forced into these identity subgroups, and now race somehow matters more than policy, then that's not a good reason to grow engagement. Not when we have people saying, I'm only voting because I'm Black, or I'm only voting because this person is Hispanic, or because I know that they're going to look out for me because I'm Indian. That is crazy. And that's not why we should be increasing engagement. And so if you're telling people that they will put you in chains, or that the entire republic is going to fall, or any other form of fear mongering, then it's not serving the right purpose. In fact, it's treating people like pawns rather than partners in this political process. It's becoming more like herding sheep than herding cats, which is the way it should be, right? We all know how difficult it is to herd cats in compared to herding sheep. Different types of individuals have different types of needs. And finding peace within one of the options that you have, that's how we go about doing this. And this is why primaries matter, but we have to discuss that primaries is a part of our political process. If we start circumventing our process, we're going to start running into major problems, which we have seen, because this was a fight trying to win as Republicans, because we opened this door up to populism and allowed people to vote for Joe Biden. Well, I shouldn't say allow, but we saw people voting for Joe Biden, and it was simply because they didn't like Trump. That's crazy, but that's the negative side of populism, when you're voting based on your emotions. And the only reason why they were able to do that is because of the economy that President Trump had created and maintained. So that there you go. All right, moving on. Another pro that can be terribly misconstrued is that populism puts a lot of pressure on the government. It processes and its people. So there's a lot of pressure that populism puts on the government, its processes, and its people. And depending on where you stand, that could be a great thing or not so great thing. And I personally believe that it is. I mean, we the people are supposed to place major pressure on the government and its processes and its people. But what are we pressuring them to do? Again, 360 thought. What is the primary purpose of the pressure? Are we tearing down the government? Are we addressing our debt? Are we putting pressure on them to allow men in girls' sports? Are we putting pressure on them to change the word mother to birthing people or birthing person? What are we pressuring the government to do? And why are we pressuring them to do it? So while we're pinning people against the government, and that sounds great in theory, but it only works if the people have an idea of what they want. And when you see people who are in these many different factions and they have so many different desires, how do you effectively meet everyone's need? This is where parties come into effect. They serve as a funneling system that connects us, not based on surface issues, but it should be based on core values. Changing party platforms or deviating from the platform can and should be a main way of winning or losing support. This is why I always advocate for not pushing a person rather than pushing a platform. Because if we hold the candidate to the party's platform, those core issues that we stand on, small government, a balanced budget, school choice, pro-life, like there are key things that we should be standing on, and our candidates, while they may have different strategies, different ways of going about and fixing problems, they should not deviate from our platform while also holding up the mantle or of the party. That should not happen. And we, the people, are supposed to hold them accountable. So now that you have a little bit of an overview of what populism is, how it can show up, and just its positive ways as well as some of the negative ways, I want to go a little bit deeper and look into populism from a perspective of how we should be interacting. What should we do as voters when it comes to populism? How do we pay attention? Because we are in a new era now. This is different. This is not the same as it used to be, where we were able to kind of just like run forward and let our leaders or let those who are, political figures kind of do all the heavy lifting. Now we're all a part of this. We're all in this now. So when we come right back, I'm going to just give a message to you, to the voter, give you some tips on how you can pay attention to populism and be able to notice when it's, not necessarily going in the direction that we think it should go in. Now, after we do that, I want to make sure that you are excited about going into this new era. Not because it's going to be an era of, everybody relating to you, but because it's a time period where the people are now going back. It's almost like we're doing a full circle moment as to when, I think it's like right before like the Civil War and all of that. I'm not hoping that we have another civil war, but there was a time period where everyone was involved, particularly during the formation of the country. And I feel like we're going back to that. So,
hello, everyone. My name is Suzanne Guy, and this is the Church's Moment. There is an incredible opportunity to start a distinct pro-life ministry at your church. We started one at our church about 5 years ago, and the fruit has been tangibly beautiful. We do monthly meetings that educate and equip the body of believers on sanctity of human life issues from womb to tomb by bringing in and featuring different pro-life leaders from all over Georgia, as well as featuring different ministries like post-abortion healing ministries or foster care ministries. There are so many great community partners out there. And then the second part of this pro-life ministry is having a care team. This is an opportunity to show moms in crisis, moms in unplanned, unwanted, or crisis pregnancies, that the church is the place to run to, that the church is a safe haven and a place to go for tangible help, real hope, true compassion, friendship, and discipleship, and yes, an opportunity to share the gospel in both word and deed. Brothers and sisters in Christ, will you consider starting a distinct pro-life ministry at your church? It's so easy. Please contact me today to find out how simple this is. You can contact me at my email, proverbs31:8@att.net. This is the church's moment.
Thank you so much for joining the show. Please remember to like, share, comment, and subscribe. And don't forget to hit that notification bell so you'll be notified every time I upload new content. Now back to the discussion. Now that we know that populism is very much so here, that is very much so a part of our political campaign process, we can't escape it. We can't escape this strategy. And the problem with populism, as we've discussed earlier, is that it appeals to not only your needs, but also your emotions. And that's where things can get kind of tricky. Whenever feelings and messaging that is designed to obtain an emotional response comes into play, it tends to put us in a position where we have to be very, very careful, because manipulation can be extremely hard to spot. And I know that's something that a lot of people may understand. So what is the responsibility of the voter? How do we still do our civic duty while also being mindful of our likes and dislikes and all the things that causes pause, as well as our emotional responses while researching candidates? All right. First tip in this new populist society to you, the voter: educate yourself. But what am I talking about? I'm not talking about educating yourself on the candidate or the campaign issues. We'll get to all of that. I want you to educate yourself on what you need. Many of us understand that property taxes are higher than normal, or that our paycheck taxes are getting a lot, less over the next, were a lot less a few years ago. But many of us don't understand how all of that plays into politics. What does that mean? And why are these changes happening? Understanding what is happening around you politically and how it directly affects your bottom line is the first step towards knowing which candidate platform works best for you. In 2024, many understood that they had more money in their pockets when Trump was in office rather than under this Biden administration. And I believe that was the root, the anchor that led to the landslide historic win for Trump. Understanding your personal needs is step one. Next, now we can research the candidates, because now we're going into there and we're knowing what is it that we're looking for. What do we want from our candidate? So now you can go in there and really do some serious research. So research the candidates. And I love the response from voters when Kamala posted her website and it didn't include any of her policy positions when she first announced. It was so beautiful to see people say things, particularly young people, say things like, where is her website? Like, I'm confused. I don't understand. Like, why do I only see a donate button? Why do I see events and parties, but I don't see any policy platforms? That is something that I really thought was great. And holding their candidate accountable, when I saw Democrat voters holding her accountable, that was really exciting for me, because we need to do that. So what I suggest whenever you're doing research is to create a checklist using the information that you found when you were doing research about what are those issues that are impacting you directly. Then go to the candidate's website, go to their social media, their YouTube page, wherever, and listen to them, get as much information as possible about the candidate, and compare and contrast what they are saying and what you need in order for them to obtain your support. What do you need to hear in order to support them? That's what we're doing right now. Now, you've already created a list based off of all the things that you're noticing that's happening, and you're like, man, this is directly connected to policy. I need to put this on my list of things I need to be fixed. Understanding what the federal government does, what the local government does, and who does what, but creating your list based on what this candidate is capable of doing and what your needs are. And then you go to their website, check them out. Talking to your neighbors or taking your neighbor's word for it, I mean, it could have worked in the past, but I don't think it's going to work going forward, because you need to be able to have deeper conversations now, especially if you're talking to someone who does do their research, but you need to position yourself in that conversation to not only just take their word for it, but understanding what your needs are and what the candidate is saying will lead to this robust conversation that you and that neighbor can have to help you obtain more informed information. It's also important to understand that being uninformed and being uneducated is not the same. The uneducated voter, in definition, drifts between those with or without a formal education or lacking understanding of the issues. Uninformed is when you are lacking the proper information to make the best decision for your family. That doesn't mean the information is not there, but it could just mean that you're not doing what's necessary in order to go get it and go read it, so you're uninformed. So just don't be an uninformed voter. That's something that we have control over. Moving on, my next tip is to question simplistic solutions. This is one that is, that kind of annoys me. So like when I ask, I'll talk to political people and political leaders, and I'll ask the question, a question like, okay, what are your top 3 priorities? And they're like, and then their response is crime, economy, healthcare. So I'm like, okay, so how do you plan to address that? Then their response is something like, oh, I'm going to address crime by reducing criminal activity. Okay. And how? Oh, by locking up more criminals. Okay. And this can go on for hours and hours and hours. And what I'm looking for is, oh, I'm going to work with this local person. I'm going to communicate with this group. I think we need to fix this. I think this is I want to see where you have actually studied this issue and you actually have a plan. Not that you know the same thing that I know. Because why am I sending you to go represent me if we both agree that crime needs to be fixed, but no one has a plan? So highlighting the lack of depth that these candidates have regarding their policy positions is something that I believe is important to us. Keep asking why until you obtain the information needed, or at least until you feel comfortable supporting someone else. But demand these hard answers. Even if they don't have it at the time, they'll go and they'll find out. They'll go put their thinking cap on and say, you know what? I've heard this question so many times. Let me go and find out. Another tip, beware of demagoguery. What does that mean? Demagoguery is basically rhetoric that incites fear or angers, and recognize when populist leaders are exploiting divisions in society for political gain. In other words, just beware of people who try to manipulate you by using fear and anger and by pitting like one group against another. We saw a lot of racial division and all this stuff. Be aware of that, because oftentimes exploiting gets confused with identity politics. And we saw a lot of this in 2024. So stay alert to messaging. If it appears to be a little too relatable, it might just be a lie. So, and a perfect example of that was Tim Walz. Tim Walz saying that he went to war, and when he didn't, then you have Kamala's team presenting her as black, and but anyway, I digress. So just make sure that you are not just watching or listening to words, but you're also watching their actions, that you are just doing this. So lastly, before we close, I want to say my last tip is advocate for accountability. Accountability can take on several different forms. It can be by asking questions and not taking the run around and all the answers all the political answers. Having a social page, a YouTube like mine, where you're spreading truth and you're talking to people and you're educating them on stuff, and supporting the political process that is designated to help with accountability, such as party primaries. In 2024, both candidates circumvented the primary process. Biden refused to participate in the primary debates, and then you also saw where Trump did the same thing. So as a result, there were a lot of voters who were left feeling more controlled and misled than being in control. But could we have done more to raise the alarm? Could we have said something like, I'm not going to vote for you if you don't participate in the debate? Absolutely, we could have done that. And we could have done it in an effective way because we saw it in the rise of the cancel culture. It proved that we are not completely at the mercy of candidates and those who refuse to listen. So never forget that we, the people, are the people. And for the sake of time, I'm going to drop additional tips in the description and in the caption for this episode so you can go check those out to pay attention, just as little things you can kind of add to your thought process as you're going about selecting candidates. And now that you have the information, there's no excuse to be uninformed. I do not want you to be. Don't do it. Thank you so much for listening. Remember, we are kicking off several new series this year on this show, so be sure to like, comment, share, subscribe, and if you are on YouTube, make sure you hit the notification bell so that you can be notified when I drop new episodes. Thank you all. You have a great, great week. I'll see you next time.